You may wonder who this weird kid is who's trying to put on his school blazer. Well, this is me. My name is Matt Parsons and I was born with Erb's palsy, which is also known as Brachial Plexus Injury. I have limited movement in my arm due to an accident which happened at birth. Not many people know about Erb's palsy, as sometimes it can be well hidden. It can make many day-to-day tasks quite tricky to do, such as getting changed or even getting out of the swimming pool. I struggle with upper body strength due to the severe nerve damage, and it leaves me only being able to use the right side of my upper body. Even getting onto the school bus was an issue growing up, as it was difficult to lift my school bags, which are always crammed full of books. PE was always an interesting lesson for me at school. All of the kids my age were really agile and could do anything that the teacher asked them to do. I was a little different. My fingers didn't really move properly and I couldn't move my arms in certain ways. My push-ups made me look a little bit strange. So my mum did physiotherapy with me every day to try and get some of the nerves fired up and to build up some muscle. I felt like a bit of a lab rat at times and it got more tedious as I got older. I'm always grateful for my parents for spending time on me, as I know without them I wouldn't have done half the things that I've accomplished in my life. It was a difficult time back in the 80s as there was no internet. My parents couldn't do the research that you can do nowadays. They felt alone and had to do the best that they could in the situation. As I started to get older, I had to take a bit more ownership of my stretching and exercises. You can see that I struggle with certain movements, but I didn't know that there were other people out there just like me. Without all of these exercises, I never would have gone on to play youth county cricket or play the instruments that I play today. One of the first times I rode a bike, I slammed on the brakes with my right hand and I flew straight over the handlebars. I've always tried to find solutions to problems, so we changed the back brakes around so my right hand would control the back brakes instead of the front ones, so there was no more flying over the handlebars for me. Strength is one of my biggest problems, that and grip. Some of the most frustrating times can be doing the simplest of tasks, such as putting on a pair of gloves. It should only take a few seconds, but for me, it can take a long time and it gets very frustrating. I started percussion and drum lessons, as this was good exercise for my hand and my arm. Gripping drumsticks and other things proved quite challenging, but I believe we should accept and adapt, a phrase that has become ever more prominent as I've grown up. We are not restricted to the normal ways of doing things. It's about finding our own way. So what if we look a little bit different? At least we're doing it. I love music and I feel very proud that I've gone on to record solo albums and played in various bands. So what about now? Well, here I am, almost 30 years later. My range of movement isn't great, but I still get by. For me, one of the biggest issues is self-image, and I don't particularly like looking at myself in the mirror. Something I know that I need to sort out. Every time I look at a photo, my eyes are drawn straight to my arm and how it looks. Maybe it's to do with the selfie society that we live in, or maybe it's some sort of deep-rooted issue that I need to get over. I decided to take an online journey on social media. This led on to various journeys across the UK and to New York. My original plan was to make a feature-length documentary, but as I started interviewing people, I realised that there was far too much to say in just a couple of hours. So far, I've met a nerve surgeon, physiotherapist, a professional NFL player, a professional boxer, fashion designer, and many, many more inspiring people with Erb's palsy. They all have their own unique experiences living with this injury, yet I have found we all share a similar outlook on life. There's still so much to explore, but in this episode I'm interviewing Tom Quick, a leading nerve surgeon in London, and his physiotherapist Hazel Brown. If there was a family out there who had a child with Erb's palsy, what would the procedure be? So if they came to see you, what would they expect?
So normally they're referred in either from neonatologists, paediatricians, GPs, therapists in other hospitals. Generally we would expect referrals to be made within the first month or so for those who have hand involvement. And then for people for children who have involvement not of the hand but of the shoulder and elbow, then normally we would get referrals 2 to 3 months and aim to be seeing patients around that 3-month mark.
Obviously things have changed quite a lot. So when I'm 35 years old now, so when I was a baby 35 years ago, there wasn't any sort of guarantee that there would be any range of movement that would improve or anything like that. I mean, how have things changed over the last sort of 30 years.
There's a lot more, I think, that we understand now about how nerves are injured, how they regenerate, the importance of time, the impact of development and regeneration in children in specific, rather than just in adults. Strangely, I think kids are really good at regenerating. That's what kids do. They heal incredibly well. You see little cuts disappear in days, when as an adult it takes you weeks. But actually, it's a vulnerable time for the developing brain to have an injury. And so a secondary injury from dividing nerves and grafting can give you an even bigger hit, a second hit to that developing brain. And so the interaction both between the nerves in the arm and the brain and function is really key. We've learnt some new techniques of how to rewire arms slightly better than 30 odd years ago. And we're still not quite sure exactly how to deploy those, in truth, exactly what is the perfect indication and where we should and shouldn't use it, but we're learning that now. But I think also it's just that using those tools in conjunction with therapy, with psychology, and also a process of education, making sure the family understand what it is, what's going to happen. Because I'm sure 35 years ago there was very little explanation to your mother,
well,
to your
absolutely.
brother. And
no, you're right, and I
else.
think that's still the case sometimes as well. I mean, my wife and I got a baby on the way, and
Congratulations.
just had our first scan the other day. And there was sort of the risks on there, and it says brachial plexus injury, and I sort of talked to the midwife, and I said, just sort of quizzed her a little. I said, "Oh, what's brachial plexus injury?" And they said, "Oh, it's not very common. Don't worry about too much about it." And I was like, "Well, actually, I've got brachial plexus injury." And she was like, "Oh." And so it is one of those things. It's people sort of have it, and I've got a colleague at work whose son's got clumps palsy.
Yeah.
But they don't know anything about it.
And I think that's where the main drive is. So you mentioned midwifery, and I think over the last 5-10 years especially, there's been a great drive, especially the Herbs Palsy group do a good teaching session and are involved in the teaching of midwives on looking at better birthing techniques, bigger birth weights, and the risk factors involved with a brachial plexus injury. So the management kind of starts from before birth in many cases. It's picked up faster now, referred through to centres, but we're also from a therapy department really lucky. I'm a physiotherapist. I've got many colleagues who are also physios working with me. Our occupational therapists have a great role to play when the child's developing as well, looking at function, getting into preschool, school, if they need any splinting. Orthotists, our orthotics team are great. We have people which are providing pressure garments even when necessary to try and help with hand function. So I think a team approach is much better rather than silos of surgeons and then parents trying to do the best that they can and therapists trying to provide exercises. I feel that us as a unit and in general there's a lot better care now than there perhaps was many years ago.
And the thing with social media, it's brilliant because there's so many parents and even kids sort of contact me asking questions, and that's something that just wasn't available back when I was a kid. So it's absolutely fantastic. Just to
go back to that point about prevention, I think with all brachial plexus injuries, the fact is we still can't get it back to normal. So the key thing is prevention. So when we're looking at devices for road safety, equipment to help motorcyclists being visible, road calming schemes, when it comes to a birth injury, the work around practice for the midwives and the obstetric teams, again working as a team, supporting each other, because I think there is a panic that happens when a birth becomes a problem.
Sure.
And it's been shown through scientific research and just through experience that the forces that people can deliver when they're in that, this is all going horribly wrong and the emotion is running wild, that injury there, if we could aim to not create the injuries, then we don't have as much of a problem. We can also then spend the time doing more work for the people that have got the injury.
Sure, and it's a difficult thing though, isn't it, with a birth injury, because mine was a birth injury, and I was nearly 11 pounds, so I was huge. 26-hour labour, so it was a difficult birth. But there's that line of, well, this baby's not going to make it, and the midwife has to do what they've got to do as well. And
Mum's at risk as well.
No, exactly. And my parents decided to take legal action, and they won the case. But again, it's one of those things where you know, looking at it from my point of view, 35 years later, you know, I had nothing to do with that. That was their decision. Did the midwife do what she
Was best.
was best at the time?
Yeah.
And so, if they hadn't done that, would I have died? You know, and so it's such a difficult thing, isn't it? It's such a difficult.
And it is a really emotional thing because you've spoken about the healthcare professional there, the child as they're developing who may or may not know any different, your reflection now as an adult, but your mum at the time and the parents at the time as well, and you know that sense of, is it my fault and what's happened, and
now,
the support then that's needed for the parents is, I think, lacking quite a bit.
I think the fact that the NHS is now very happy to admit it makes mistakes. There has to be some way to say those mistakes the lessons learned have to come back into the system. So it is important, that legal system, the advocacy that lawyers have to get to the basis. Was it a mistake or was it negligence? Because that's a hard decision.
So do you deal with mainly birth injuries or accidents? You know, because obviously it happens with a lot of motorbike accidents.
Yeah.
My practice probably is about balanced, 50-50 or 60-40. I think our unit as a whole, the majority of the time spent actually for the surgeons is in the adult work, because the energy, the forces there are a lot bigger. So the injuries, whilst I'm not grading the impact upon the patient, but the impact upon the nerves and the muscles and the tendons and the bones, means that we end up operating more on the adults. So from a surgical point of view, the time spent in theatre is biased towards the adults. The amount of children that we operate on for nerve reasons and for secondary reconstruction, for shoulder problems, forearm, hand problems, is less. We don't know how many children in the UK or in England, however the health services are lined up, are born with brachial plexus injury. There was a study 20 years ago now, using the British Paediatric Surveillance Unit, the BPSU, where paediatricians are mandated to report these things. Now, the rate then suggested there's around 200, 300 patients a year. International data has shown probably that incidence is dropping, related to better diabetic care, better use of caesarean section, which is protective, and again, better midwifery care. And Tim Draycott, one of the professors of obstetrics in Bristol, is leading on that kind of training as well. So we think there's probably been a drop, but the injuries that we see are, in a way, worse.
I've got a few questions that people have sort of sent in from Instagram and Facebook. Now there's one here, it says, are there any surgeries for an 18-year-old that has complete paralysis due to BPI? I mean, is there anything that can be done at all these days? I mean, I know that's quite difficult without having that consultation. I know that's the thing. There's a lot of people that want questions,
it's just abroad.
But you know, let's say for instance, for me, I'm 35. Is there anything that potentially could be done?
So I think the key thing is to get to a team. So get your GP to refer you. Any advice that we can give is generic, but I think it is important to say that decision making is really important. There are loads of options, but what's the right option for that individual should be explained, explored.
And that's where the team approach, kind of occupational therapist, physiotherapist, as well as surgeon, working together, and the orthotist as well, because is it necessary to do surgery to get somebody to do X, Y and Z? Could we create an orthosis, so an elbow locking splint, so a type of device that holds somebody who can't bend their elbow into place to then be able to use their hand to manipulate? So, and I think whereas maybe 20 years ago the surgeons would have possibly gone ahead and done more, now we'd look more at a team approach and how can we build up prior, and a bit, are we meeting the needs of the individual and that person?
Sure. Because that physiotherapy obviously is so important, isn't it? And I've had it every day of my life. And is that something you think would continue for the rest of my life? Yeah.
Well, as a physiotherapist, then I say yes.
Yeah,
but when I'm explaining to patients and to families, I try to introduce it as a habit. So it's like brushing your teeth, or many people choose to go to the gym or to swim or have a hobby. So actually doing it regularly shouldn't be arduous, but actually is maintaining and protecting in the future, so that if you do end up feeling unwell and you can't mobilise quite so well and you get a bit tight, you're not restricted as much as you could be, potentially by not doing exercise.
I think for a lot of people that I've interacted with, they're very self-conscious about it.
And the body image is a huge thing.
No, it really is, and it was for me when I was younger as
Yeah.
well. And one of the reasons I started the beating BPI thing was I wanted to go to the gym and start doing push-ups and pull-ups and stuff like that, which I struggled to do. What I found was that my right arm was obviously a lot more dominant, and it was sort of pulling my back and things like this. And so I was trying to find new ways of doing things. So for push-ups, that I had a push-up bar, so I wasn't lopsided and things like that. Do you think there's any way that people could be sort of evened up, as it were, obviously because my left pec's smaller than my right one, my left bicep's smaller, and people get very self-conscious about that. Is there anything that can be done, do you think?
I think a lot of it's due to anatomy and actually the actual growth process that happens. So when we're talking about the plexus injuries and the nerve injuries, we focus on the nerve, but the nerve controls the sensation, it controls the movement of the muscles as well. And when your bones don't have the movement put through them, they don't grow at the same length. So seeing things like your collarbone, and interrupt me when you want to or need to, your collarbone shortened or the shape of your shoulder joints adjusted because you're not going through a normal range of movement. So there's certain limitations that will always be there, and certain muscles which, because they haven't originally been innovated and their composition's changed, will never be the same. So things like the biceps can look shorter and tighter, and the same with the pec sometimes can be a bit more prominent and short on that side. I think it would be difficult in the long term to say that could be evened out and changed, but exercises will always help to stop that getting shorter. So it's the difference between maintaining a range of movement and ending up in a really shortened position.
And I think there's a difference between the paediatric injury, so the birth injury an adult acquired, or an injury after skeletal growth.
Right.
So as Hazel mentioned, those with obstetric palsy are going to have a difference in the growth of the arm, of the limb. It is going to be shorter in the segments, will also look shorter because of the posture. So not only are the individual building blocks smaller, they're not in a straight line, so they look shorter. So of course there are cosmetic surgeries which can be undertaken if you want to, as you say, instead of doing a push-up like this. Of course there are ways with surgery to get a longer arm. But is it worth taking on those irreversible risks of bone lengthening, of all these other things, which undoubtedly will decrease function? Or are there workarounds, like you've said, with experts who've met this, learned from other patients, understand the process themselves, say, we could lengthen your arm, but why don't we give you a handle so you can do your press-ups, and you are then balanced and straight. So I think in answer to your 18-year-old's question, I think it depends. If it's been 18, there's a real difference with time with nerve injury. So when people reach adulthood after a paediatric injury with a flail arm with no movement, then there is very little that I can do to return movement. There is an operation where if there are some functioning nerves, and we can steal nerves from other parts of the body in terms of a nerve transfer, so from the intercostals, or the muscle that controls a trapezius muscle in your neck, and take a muscle from the thigh and bring it up. But again, if you have a hand that's insensate, that can't even feel protective sensation, and there's no control anywhere else, you could wire in a muscle to bend the arm. But it's not going to be that much use in that you can't use the hand. The whole arm is there to move your hand in space. Occasionally you use your elbows or whatever else, but basically your arm's there to move your hand. So if you don't have a functioning hand, to build everything else up doesn't make a huge amount of sense for function. But in the few patients that we've had experience of this with, they do sense that the arm swings better. They do say they feel more normal. And so I think there is a benefit which we've never really understood to that feeling more like how they want to feel, how that patient imagines themselves. There is an injury called an avulsion injury, where let's start with a rupture. So if you imagine the cable to the television screen, if you cut that cable, we can join it straight back together again if it were cut. So if we have people, as we do, frequently attacked with knives, we get them quickly. I can just put the two ends together, sew them together. It's not like an electric cable, it doesn't immediately work, but it allows the nerves from the close ends to grow into the far end. That doesn't happen in closed brachial plexus injuries, those without a stab wound. It's stretch. And so we end up having to put grafts in the way. So tubes along, can't put the two ends together, they don't quite meet. So I've got to put something in the way to guide those nerves that are trying to grow. And the speed that nerves grow at is presumed to be about 1 millimetre a day. Everybody quotes this. We don't actually know for certain that all nerves grow at the same rate, and we don't know whether kids grow at the same rate as adults. You presume probably not, and we presume different nerves are different thicknesses, different qualities. Some have insulation around them, some don't. They're going to grow at different rates, and it's also to do with where in the arm they're injured. If you're injured closer, it's harder to regrow them than if you're injured further away. So in that rupture injury, the pulled apart injury, the nerves do regrow, and we know from other orthopaedic procedures, you might have seen people with big cages around their legs, and we can stretch bones, and the muscles and the nerves grow with that. And we know that there's a rate that you can pull bone, and that the nerves will keep up with that rate. So again, it's about, strangely, the same kind of speed. It's about 1 millimetre a day that we can do what's called destruction genesis. We can pull things and make them grow.
Well, just bringing back kind of on an anatomical point of view, that one of the common questions that gets asked is along these lines, and the thoughts about something being sewn together. But just to reiterate that actually what we're providing when we're sewing things together is a tube, because we talk about a nerve, but a nerve is a structure which is quite complicated if you look back at your biology groups. But in essence, we're looking at a tube with an axon or with a nerve fibre growing through it. So you're providing a tube for the nerve to grow between. So just because you've got the two ends sewn together, that doesn't mean that it's like you're switching it on. It's then got that regrowth by the millimetre a day along that tube, which is why it takes longer and why then it can get complicated and the misunderstandings can happen.
We can laser weld or chemically weld before that nerve knows it's damaged. And that is a possibility. So there's a load of things that it won't be in our lifetimes, but the work will be coming to that kind of
going to be
fruition.
my sort of next sort of question. Like, where do you see it going in the future? I mean, obviously there's been a massive progress over the last sort of 20, 30 years. I mean, where do you see it going from there?
I think there is an awful lot that will come through biology and through engineering and through the interfaces. And it's not just the middle of each area, it's the crossovers. So it's where science meets engineering, meets medicine. And that's the really fun area where the interactions that we have. You put the patient in the middle of that, and I think anything is possible, but it's funding. So it's to get the money to drive those things. And if they're set up properly and we have the right question, the patient groups having a voice, the right team together, and working with University College London, Centre for Nerve Engineering, the Aspire Create group, we have a team of experts that I can say, we want this done. They go, oh, we'll do this, and that. So there's no reason why in future, instead of having to take nerve grafts from the leg and scarring a leg to take the sural nerve to lay it in as a nerve graft, we can't take some blood or some other cells and make your own nerve just off the shelf, 3D print it, put your cells in, drop it in. So that is possible in rats. There are challenges again to do that in humans. We don't have a drug to treat nerve injury. It's a very rare condition where there is no medicine that makes it better. So again, we've got cellular work, we're designing drugs, we're trialing those, but to get them to human trials, it takes millions. And it's funding, it's support, and it's public opinion. That's why things like this, if we can get patient groups and people to come together to say, these are the answers we want, then funders listen.
So I mean, there's people out there. Obviously, I as mentioned earlier, won the court case. My parents won the court case, and the idea of that was that if there are any operations that are available, then they can do that. But if people aren't in that situation, are things available through the NHS?
There are several centres within the UK which are NHS. We work on the NHS. There's several specialist centres that can provide treatment and advice and surgery if necessary, but team-based approach for individuals. So we've had adults coming through in their 40s who've suffered from obstetric injuries as well, and then come through and operated or carried out the treatment. So it is available. It's just looking for your nearest centre or Googling what centre you'd like to visit.
I've got this sort of kink in my wrist, and I can't straighten it out. I can't turn it over. What causes this to not be able to straighten out like my right arm, and what causes that sort of that kink in that wrist? And in fact, my fingers aren't moving as fast as the other one. It doesn't hold me back too much because I manage to do all the things I want to do. So just for the sort of people out there that might watch it, they might have kink in the wrist, and they might why, what is that? What is it called? Obviously it's a nerve damage, but why can't I straighten it? That's always been something that I've always wanted to ask.
I can't put my hands on you.
Yeah, no, you can go on.
So as Hazel has a look, I'll just...
Yeah, you talk through what I'm doing.
Yeah, so again, there's an awful lot there that will be fixed.
Yeah, bony.
And bony and just might need intervention to improve it. And there's posture, there's anatomy. And I think there's a difference between the two. There are things that might need surgery to correct, but way before that, there's ways we can balance up muscles and we can support relearning. In simple answers, why do, for example, joints develop contractures? And it's part of this growing, we mentioned before that the bones when you're a child are growing. Yeah? So when you go to the doctors, they ask you to cross your legs and they hit you with a hammer over your knee, your leg kicks out. That's a tendon reflex. So you stretch a muscle by hitting it with a hammer, the quads muscle, it gets stretched. That sends a message to your spinal cord that says I'm being stretched, and the muscle's natural response is contract. And that's what you test. You're testing that nerve reflex. As your body grows, you're stretching muscle. Now normal non-nerve injured muscle knows, it's just the bone growing, you just gently let out a bit of length. Nerve injured muscle isn't as smart, and it doesn't necessarily get that. And so when you've got, particularly at periods of really quick growth, it goes, I'm being stretched, what do I want to do? I want to contract. That's what I do. I'm a muscle, I'm contracting. So the muscle at the front here, as the bone jacks it out and the tension gets bigger, it wants to try and maintain that, so it pulls to keep the same length. Imagine the shoulders growing, and the biceps muscle comes up. And so that gives you an elbow flexion contracture. Some people develop what's called a supination contracture, which is hands to the ceiling, if you're drinking soup, supination, or pronation contractures. Now, your hand is in a more pronated position, which is great for everyday life, because most of what we do is texting or here. Very little that we do with both hands is here, but washing your face, for example, taking money from your parents as a kid. But we struggle to increase a range of movement. So if someone's hand is stuck like that and they're trying to type, what we can do is stretch it first and try straps and orthoses to hold it in a more functional position. But if it physically won't go, then we can reset the bone into that position. So there's many people whose hands are here. And to put them there and to stretch the arm out is possible.
So simplistically, it's due to the muscle getting tighter and contracting more, and then the effect of that is that the joints themselves are affected, so their shape is slightly different, so that then they don't allow the ability for you to be able to stretch out fully.
So me going to the gym, let's say I wanted to even out and put on a bit of muscle, would that actually, is that a hindrance then, do you think?
Not if you're stretching properly.
After stretching, okay.
If you are going to the gym for whatever reason, whether it's fitness, whether it's appearance, whether it's just to get rid of stress, the thing is, go take advice from somebody who knows. You aren't going to be doing in the same way, you don't get dressed in the same way or shave in the same way as somebody else. You need to learn those ways, and a therapist or somebody else trained in understanding how you should train is great to give advice. The muscle bulk is never going to be the same. So a nerve injured muscle isn't normal muscle. So it's been disconnected. The nerve tells it what to be. So if I take a nerve from a postural muscle, one that's constantly tonically contracted, always on, is very different to a muscle that gives you the bursts of energy. And they're actually designed differently. Their chemicals are different. The whole thing about them, from structure to cells, is all different. But if I take a nerve from a postural muscle and wire it into a fast twitch muscle, that fast twitch muscle becomes a slow twitch, it becomes a postural muscle. So the nerve sets the muscle. So if you've injured your nerve, the muscle is never going to be the same. The time that it was de-innervated makes a difference.
I think that exercise and maintenance is really important, and actually we see a lot of children who are doing really well, they look like they've got good range and they're using their arm, but then they go through a growth spurt and then they get tight again because of all the mechanics that we've spoken about earlier. So I would personally recommend that people carry on the exercises forever. It may not need to be, you're told every nappy change when you first start, it may not need to be that if it's 3 times a week, 4 times a week, but as soon as you start to feel any tightness, going up to a daily basis again, because the last thing that you want is for it to start to get tight, for the exercises then to get sore, painful, and for them not want to do it, and then they get left even longer. So then before you know it, you're left with an arm that's less capable than it was 6 months ago, which could have been maintained by exercise alone, which then they get referred through to see the surgical team, and they say, well, actually, we probably need to do some surgery on here at this point, but it could have all been prevented.
Yeah. So prevention, as ever, is better than cure every single time. So don't let it get stiff.
I mean, I don't get much pain in my arm. I'm quite lucky, but some people get a lot of pain. One thing that's really bizarre, like this part of my arm here. Well, it's not numb actually. It feels like if I put my nails down like that, it feels like pins and needles almost. And it's quite sensitive. So I've got quite a few tattoos on this arm. I've never do it there. Yeah. I mean, what's causing that sort of prickly feeling? And obviously, when someone traps a nerve, that's quite excruciating. So, is that something that can be sort of looked into if people have pain?
So Hazel's done quite a lot of work already on pain in kids.
So yeah, so actually part of the reason that I got really interested in this was what you've spoken about earlier was the body image, but also the pain aspect, because I came into my job and we were looking very much from a medical model approach, so looking at range of movement, strength, like we've already discussed, but I felt that the child and parents reporting of pain and body image changes were being somewhat neglected. So I just did a small study within our cohort looking at what the incidence of pain was, and actually 40% of the patients that I reviewed, so there was only 50 people or 50 adolescents within the study, but 40% of them reported pain within the last 2 weeks. So for me that was quite a significant amount, and I'm furthering that study to look at types of pain, and it wasn't uncommon for them to be saying that it's that pins and needle tingling type of pain, which we wouldn't normally associate with an Erb's palsy.
There's the musculoskeletal pain, the muscles are tight, short, the joints are tight, the wrong shape. You're relying on other muscles at the wrong length. The shoulder blade often comes round and sticks out and wings, and that can put a lot more tension on the rhomboid muscles and the trapezius to bring the shoulder blade back. So muscles are working at the wrong length all over the place. But just like your burglar alarm in your house, sometimes it goes off when there's no burglar. Okay, and that wakes you up from your sleep and you're all panicked, oh, there's a burglar in the house, oh no there isn't. And that's what neuropathic pain, it's the sensing system going wrong. So you're tingling, I'm not sure if that's unpleasant or just weird. But
it's just weird, like,
yeah.
I just feel
So this is what's called paresthesia, strange tingling feelings that aren't bad or bothersome, but just weird. And that often affects this part of the hand, right down often to the hand. And again, it's just the way the nerves are mapped. But the worst injured is the C5 and the C6. So they can have strange feelings, reduced feelings, hypoesthesia, reduced sensation, it just feels a bit blunt and a bit not right. And when we test that, there's almost always a difference in all the kids, but it's normal for them. They don't know both hands are supposed to feel the same, so it's just they don't report it. So in answer to your question, this almost certainly is related to the original injury, and that the nerves themselves haven't grown correctly or are still in scar, so that they're not communicating the information clearly. Sort of interference in the life.
If I push in just here, just
Can
there.
get it to shoot down.
Yeah, it's weird because if I get a massage, someone goes in there, it's like, wow, it's just like it's shooting pain, and it's just kind of trying to work out why it's doing that, and it's.
So that is your brachial plexus. So those at home, if you tilt your heads to the side, you'll feel there's a tight band here, and that's the brachial plexus. It's 5 nerves that come obliquely out.
Yeah.
But just right there, and you'll be feeling that neuroma, that
Scar
healing,
tissue.
the scar tissue around it. And that's called Erb's Point, actually, where you're touching.
Yeah.
There was this chap who we've named Erb's palsy after. He was a German physiologist and neurologist, and that's the point where the nerves branch, essentially, to connect the shoulder and to the arm from what's called the upper trunk, those first two nerves.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's been a real pleasure.
No, it's been absolutely amazing, and I've learned so much as well, and it's really nice to have the opportunity, and hopefully it will really benefit other people as well. So,
It's a pleasure.
thank you so much.
Next time on Exploring Erb's Palsy, I speak to Joe Campbell, a highly motivated gym enthusiast who shows me lots of techniques he uses when he goes to the gym. For many of us with Erb's Palsy, a gym can feel quite an intimidating place to be, but Joe helps break down those walls and opens up in a long conversation about his life with Erb's Palsy.
I hit snooze 3 times, I'm running late, but it's all good. I'm just trying to stack that paper so I can slide to the studio later and rap about this life that I'm living. Everything is expensive and these prices are driven. Every night I've been thinking, gotta apply for positions as I'm cutting cigarillos with a knife in the kitchen. Roll it up, I'm feeling right in my system. Stress relieved, I'm at ease, now I'm writing and spitting. Thought about